several of you asked me, how did I become a writer? So I'm going to start my presentation by answering that question. How did Jim become a writer? Well, first of all, let me tell you, when Jim was your age, even the fifth graders, I had no idea I would ever be a writer. In fact, I hated to write. I absolutely loved to read. And you guys all love reading, right? Yeah. But I absolutely hated to write. In fact, when I was in middle school, which some of you will be going into next year, I even had my mother write my papers. That's not good. And even when I was in high school, even though I was writing my papers by myself at that time, I still absolutely thought writing is the worst thing in the world. Oh, I hate it. So when I was a senior in high school, that means the very last year, my English teacher assigned a paper for us. So I wrote it, didn't like doing it. I handed it in when it was due. And a few days later, the teacher handed all the papers back, except mine. So my first thought was, well, I didn't get my paper back from the teacher because it was so bad. She probably just crumpled it up and threw it away and gave me a failing grade on it. So I almost fell out of my desk when she said, I didn't give Jim his paper back because it is so good. I wanted to read it to you. And I don't know which one was more shocking. The fact that my teacher actually thought I could write a good paper, or that I had to read it in front of the class. Because when I was 17, I was a really shy kid. And the thought of standing up in front of the class was really frightening. But I went ahead and I read it. And every paper I handed in for the rest of that school year, my teacher gave me an A. And she convinced me that, gee, maybe I actually was a good writer. But then as I got older, I became a teacher, I traveled, I did some other jobs, and I really didn't think about doing any more writing. But then, when I got to be about 30, I thought back to what my teacher had said, and I thought, well, maybe I should actually see if I can write and see if I can sell it to a magazine or a newspaper. So I went out and I bought this bad boy. This, 40 years ago, this was really the most advanced thing you could get for writing. This is way before computers, way before the internet, way before cell phones, way before iPads. So I paid a lot of money for it. And I came home and I thought, what have I done? I paid a lot of money for this thing and I have no idea if I can even sell a single piece of writing. So I looked at it. And I looked at it. And I kind of almost wished that it would go away and I could get my money back in my wallet. But I couldn't, of course. So I said, okay, time to sit down and go to work. So I turned it on, put in some paper.
Wait, that's not
Got up, drank some coffee, looked out the window. Finally, I came back. And I finished. Of course, it took a lot longer than the 2 or 3 minutes that I just took, but if I actually took all the time that it took me to write things, we'd be here tonight, tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you just kind of have to think, okay, Jim actually took all the time that he just told us he did. So I took it, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, addressed it to a magazine publisher, put it out in my mailbox. And because I knew it would take a little while for the publisher to answer, I came back and started writing. And I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote. And I kept going up to my mailbox. Nothing. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But then one day, I went up to my mailbox, and there was something from the publisher. So I opened it up. I was really excited. And I looked at it, and it said, "We do not accept your writing." Ow. That hurt. But that was only one. So I kept going. New stories. All the time I'm writing new stories. And sending them out. And by now, I had so many envelopes in the mail that almost every day I'd go up to the mailbox and there would be a reply from a publisher. And always, rejected. A couple of times, I get 2 and 1 horrible, horrible day. And you can count with me. 5. What do you guys? No, 4 rejections in one day. But I kept going. And then, one day, I went out to my mailbox, and instead of a little envelope, there was a big envelope. So I came back inside, and I was nervous, trembling, pulled it out, and I looked. It was my story! Oh, man! I was so happy. And then, I looked inside the big envelope again, and there was a little envelope, and there was a check made out to me cents, and I would have been happy. Of course, I would have been a lot happier if instead of 15, this was for 1,000, but you know, you take what you can get. So now I was a published writer. Well, as you can imagine, $15 is not going to buy a lot of food. So I wound up, you know, I was still doing a little bit of writing, but you know, I had to get a real job. So I did some things I didn't really want to do, and then a few years later, I decided, okay, I've got some money in the bank. I'm going to see if I can make money as a real writer. And in the first month, I made $60. But then I began publishing a monthly running magazine called Northwest Runner. And I did that for 17 years. And I actually made pretty good money doing that. But after a while, I left the magazine and I went to work for a company where I was writing advertisements. And I hated it. I didn't like my boss. I didn't like a lot of the people I worked with. And I absolutely hated the kind of writing I was doing. So finally, one day, I came to work, and my boss said, "Jim, come into my office." So he sat there. I sat here. He pointed his finger at me, and he said, "Jim, you are fired." And you know what? That was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because if I hadn't been fired at that exact moment, I would not have been looking for work. Because I came home that afternoon and I told my wife I was fired, and she was not happy. So I was very motivated to look for something else to do. And a week or two later, I found an advertisement for a little book publisher in Delaware. You all know where Delaware is, right? Okay. They were looking for somebody to work for them. So I answered the ad, and not long afterward, they gave me my first book to write. It was Charles Schulz who wrote Peanuts, the famous comic strip. And then, so this was how I got my start in writing kids' books. The very first one, Charles Schulz. Ever since then, I've written about another 180. I've written biography. I've written history. I've written science. I've written about TV game shows. And I've written about a whole bunch of other things. And no matter what book I've written, I've always enjoyed it. I think probably one of the most interesting books I wrote was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. When it comes to music, I absolutely love classical music. So classical music is over here in terms of what I like, and at the other end of the spectrum is hip-hop. I don't like hip-hop. I don't listen to it. I don't like the people who make hip-hop music. So, you can imagine, I was given an assignment to write a book about hip-hop. It was a record label, a hip-hop label called No Limit. And when I was offered the chance to write it, I could have said, yes, I will write it, and I will get a paycheck. Or I could have said, no, I'm not going to write it, but then I'm going to get a paycheck. So what do you think I said? Yes! So I started researching the subject, and right away I found something that made me very interested in it. The rapper who founded the label was a very, very good basketball player who had several tryouts with the Spurs, with the San Antonio Spurs and the Toronto Raptors. And he even played in several exhibition games. So I love sports. So even though I was still writing about hip hop, at least I knew the guy I was writing about was an athlete, which helped. But the thing that absolutely made this book totally memorable for me was that one of the artists on this label was Snoop Dogg. Or I guess now he's going by Snoop Lion. But anyway, as I researched Snoop, I found out that he had played high school football. And he loved football so much that he spent thousands and thousands of dollars of his money to start a football program for kids in the Los Angeles area who were aged 9 or 10 up to 14. And I thought, wow, this is really good. So already my opinion of Snoop was undergoing a big change. But the thing that absolutely put the cherry on top of the Snoop Dogg sundae was when I found out that every year, just before the Super Bowl, he would fly a team of his all-stars from Los Angeles to the city that was hosting the Super Bowl. Probably for a lot of these kids, it was the first time they'd been out of LA, it was probably the first time they'd been on an airplane. And again, he picked up the tab for everything: airfare, hotel, food. And the day before the Super Bowl, his team, his all-star team, would play an all-star team from the host city. And he called this game the Snooper Bowl. So I thought, how can you not like a guy like this? So that's one thing about writing. A lot of times you start off with an opinion about somebody or something, and as you actually have to research it, you find that your first opinion is actually wrong. Okay, so that's how I got into writing, which answers a lot of your questions. I know that there were a lot, especially the 4th and 5th graders, there were way more questions than I had time to answer. So let's go ahead and if you have a question to ask, talk to your teacher and come up here, ask it, and I'll answer for everybody.
How old were you when you started?
Okay, the question is, how old was I when I started writing books? I was 13 years younger than I am right now. Well, that's a closely guarded secret. Okay, I didn't hear the first part. Okay, the question is, when I started writing books, how much of my spare time did I use? Well, when I started writing books, that was my job. So, whatever time I had for working, I was using to write books.
How scary can your books get?
How scary can my books get? Well, when I write them, if I can tolerate the level, okay, you have to understand, I don't like horror films. My wife loves horror films, I don't. So whenever she wants to watch a horror film, I go someplace else. So I can't really write about something that's totally scary, but I do like writing about things that are kind of gross, but not scary. The question is, how do I use a typewriter? Well, a long time ago, I learned how to type using all 10 fingers. And the computer keyboard is exactly the same as a typewriter keyboard. So, you know, most of the time I don't even look because I know where my fingers are. You know, I look at the screen to watch the words as they come out. Hello?
Why did you get fired?
Okay. The question is, why did I get fired? Well, for one thing, it was very obvious that I didn't like what I was doing. For another reason, this happened in 1999, and for the adults in the audience, you will recognize that as the start of the big internet boom. What that meant was that a lot of companies started up at that time, and they would grow and grow and grow and grow, and then all of a sudden, they would stop growing, and then they would start losing money. And the best way of cutting expenses when you're losing money is to fire people. So I was one of the very first people that got fired. And like I say, one of the best things that ever happened to me. I went from doing something I hated to doing something that I absolutely loved. So for you guys, a lot of times something bad is going to happen to you. And you never know. As one door slams shut, another door is probably going to open.
So basically your teacher inspired you to write?
Well,
She was wondering if your teacher inspired you to write.
okay, thank you. Yes, my high school teacher definitely inspired me to write. My only regret is that I never thanked her for what she did. Because when I was a senior in high school, she was probably in her mid to late 60s. So unfortunately, she died many, many years ago. And I never got a chance to say thank you. So you guys, if somebody does something nice for you, thank them. You never know what's going to happen.
What did you want to do in high school for them?
Okay, what did I want to do when I was in high school? Well, for a long time, I thought that I wanted to join the Navy. I thought I wanted to go to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, which probably would have been a big mistake because I didn't have the kind of personality that would have made me a naval officer. And the kinds of subjects I would have had to have taken at Annapolis were not the ones that I was very strong in. Thank you.
What's your favorite story in Scary Ghosts?
What was my favorite story in Scary Ghosts? All 6 of them.
If you have to choose just one, what would it be?
Your question don't make sense.
You would have to refresh. Okay, let's be honest. I wrote that book about 4 or 5 years ago, and if you say what 6 stories were in Scary Ghosts, I couldn't tell you. I'd have to have the book in front of me.
My favorite one was the one about Lincoln. Oh no, Basha.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of like the one about Lincoln.
So you pretty much stayed with one company, like making books, or did you just get accepted for different things, like write books?
Okay, the question has to do with my publishers. About 70 or 80 of my books were with the company that published my first one. But I have about 12 to 15 different publishers that I've worked with.
She wanted to know why you didn't like hip hop.
What?
Okay, the question is, why don't I like hip-hop? Well, for one thing, I can barely understand, I can hardly understand what the guys are saying. For another reason, I like classical music so much, and there's so much of it to listen to, that I really don't have any time to listen to many other kinds of music.
When's your birthday and I will reach you?
I guess, when's your birthday?
My birthday is August 18th, which, by the way, is the same birthday as Robert Redford.
Boo?
Since you wrote 180 books, how many are about sports?
Okay, the question is, of my 180 books, how many are about sports? Okay, I wrote a book about David Beckham, the soccer player. I wrote a book about Troy Polamalu, who plays pro football. I've written 11 books about pro football teams. I've written 9 books about NBA teams. I just finished writing 6 books about European soccer teams. So 6, 9, 15, 26, 28. So almost 15% of my books have been about sports. Are any of my books about skateboarding? No.
Why did you read it?
She wanted to know, why did you write the books?
Okay, why do I write books? Well, I like it. One of the really fun things about writing books, especially nonfiction, is that you learn so much. Like the example of Snoop Dogg. In the beginning, I didn't like him, I didn't respect him, I thought he was terrible. But as I wrote the book and I did research, I found out that, Snoop actually is a pretty cool guy. And it's the same thing with every other book I read, or that I write. Even if I know quite a bit about it, when I start writing, I learn even more. And if it's something that I don't know anything about, then hey, it's a chance to learn something that often turns out to be pretty cool.
How many scary stories have you written?
Okay, how many scary stories have I written? I wrote 4 books. Each one had 6 stories in it, so 24. This series has been so popular that I really wish the publisher would ask me to write some more, but so far that hasn't happened. Okay, the question is, how long does it take me to write a book? Some of them, especially that's on a subject that I know something about, I've done in as little as about a week to a week and a half. Most of them take at least 2, 3, 4 weeks. One book took more than a year to write, but that was because, number one, it was very long, and number two, I was continually stopping that to work on other projects. So, at the very minimum, a week, at the very maximum, a year.
What state are you from?
The question is, what state am I from? Okay, I was born in San Francisco, moved to Maryland when I was a tiny kid, moved back to Washington, lived in California for a while, and then I've lived back up here since 1976.
Even if you didn't earn money, would you still write books?
Okay, the question is, if I didn't earn any money, would I still write books? Well, you have to earn a living. So if I had any time left over after I worked another job, then yeah, maybe I'd try to write books because I've always wanted to be able to make a living as a writer.
When you did your research about Snoop Dogg, did you find any of the Texas rappers?
I want to know when you did your research about Snoop Dogg if you found any other rappers from Texas.
Okay, I think you all heard the question. Most of the guy who ran the record company that I was writing about was from, originally he was from Louisiana. So most of the rappers that he worked with were from Louisiana. I don't recall anybody being specifically from Texas.
Did you write any little kids or children's books?
Well, the scary stories are written primarily for grades 1 and 2. I've also written books about knights, castles, peasants, and arms and armor for grades 1 and 2.
How did you choose to become an author?
We want to know, why did you choose being an author over other things in your life?
Okay, the question is, why did I choose to become an author instead of other things I could have been doing? Well, some of the things I wanted to do, like play quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, I couldn't do because I wasn't big enough, I wasn't strong enough. Other things had no appeal to me, whereas being a writer, it's something that I enjoy and something that I get paid for, so why not?
What kind of kid books do you like?
All the books that I write are for kids. So they are biography, history, science, sports, TV shows.
She asked another question about how old you were. Let's go to the next.
How many books did you write?
She wanted to know how many books you wrote.
Okay, again, I've written about 180 books. And as I told some of the classes, my goal is to write enough books to make a pile that's taller than I am. I think I'm probably right about here, so I got another foot and a half to go. And as soon as that pile is complete, then we're going to start another pile.
What date was it when you started writing that?
Okay, what date was it when I started writing? This first book was published in 2001, so about 13 years ago.
Yes, data.
Did you like your updated
Okay. The question is, did I like my old typewriter? Well, I liked it because it helped me get my start as a writer. But the thing about a typewriter is very limited in what it can do. How many of you guys use a computer to write your papers, your reports? Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier on a computer because if you make a mistake, just hit backspace. Or if you want to move paragraphs around, you cut and paste. I couldn't do any of that stuff on this typewriter.
So we're at time, so let's give Mr. Whiting a round of applause.